Hey y'all, Professor Olofsson has asked me to compile this presentation of the 2020 presidential candidates by the issue. Now, I only am going to talk about the Democrats and the Republicans just for the sake of time. However, if you are more interested in a third party, feel free to look them up, and I can actually help you with that if you need the help. So let's go and take a look at what we're gonna look at. So first things first, we're gonna see who the candidates are, and then we're gonna discuss some social issues, domestic policy, immigration issues, healthcare, education, economic issues, COVID-19, and then we're just gonna wrap it up with a nice conclusion. Let's go ahead and meet the candidates. So the Republican National Party has nominated the incumbent President Donald Trump. He's a former businessman from New York City, primarily in real estate. And then we have the incumbent Vice President, Mike Pence. He is a former congressman and governor of Indiana. So then we have the Democrats have nominated former Vice President Joe Biden, Vice President under President Obama, and longtime senator from Delaware prior to that. They have also nominated for the vice presidency Senator Kamala Harris. She is a current senator from California. Prior to that, she was the Attorney General of California. So let's go ahead and take a look at some issues. On social issues, we're going to look at President Trump first. So like in class, we're going to look at some more controversial issues, and we're going to talk about them because it's important. Now, you may not talk about all these issues with elementary schoolers, given that they are pretty controversial. However, they're important for us as adults to talk about because it is important in this election. So on social issues, we're going to look at abortion. So President Trump is pro-life. He supports limiting abortion. He supports Supreme Court justices and judges that reflect those values, and supports legislation limiting abortion. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some LGBTQ plus issues too. He has said that he will do everything in his power to protect LGBTQ citizens. However, he did ban transgender people from the military service, citing that it was just too costly to pay for gender reassignment surgery and estrogen and testosterone, and that there was no financial viable way for it to work. And we're just going to wrap it up on social issues, looking at his stance on Confederate monuments. He has not changed his stance since 2016. He supports leaving Confederate monuments up. So let's go and take a look at former Vice President Biden. On abortion, he's pro-choice, and he would like to pass federal legislation protecting a woman's right to choose. On LGBTQ plus issues, he is pro-LGBTQ per his campaign website. And that being said, he supports legislation protecting LGBTQ plus individuals. President Trump tends to favor legislation regarding freedom of religion. And so those tend to conflict with LGBTQ plus protection. They do butt heads. And so you can support both, but in this particular, on these particular two candidates, this is how they view it. One is more freedom of religion, and one is more protection of LGBT plus individuals. So then former Vice President Biden's stance on Confederate monuments, as it's becoming a more hot topic issue, and he's formed a stance, he supports taking them down. Let's go and take a look at some domestic policy. President Trump, on gun control. He is a little more centrist than you'd think he'd be. That being said, he is still backed by the NRA, but he said he supports background checks, like universal background checks after the El Paso and Dayton shootings. He has also promised stricter gun laws on buyers, and he favors closing loopholes in gun laws that allow you to just get it without a background check. But he does worry that any laws kind of beyond that are a slippery slope to a total handgun ban. So marijuana, he supports states' rights to choose to decriminalize marijuana, so he doesn't really have a stance federally. He just thinks it should be left up to the states. That's his stance. But he does support federal legalization of medical marijuana. So let's go ahead and take a look at former Vice President Biden's stances. On gun control, he supports universal background checks, much like the president. However, to contrast, he supports an assault weapons ban, which President Trump does not. He also supports this technology called like smart weapons or smart guns, where it requires like a fingerprint in order to shoot it. Arguably, he argues that it would help cut down with stolen weapons being used in shootings. So for marijuana, he supports federal decriminalization and expungement of criminal use records. So like if you're arrested for possession or smoking marijuana, it would be expunged from your record. And he supports the federal legalization of medical marijuana, much like the president. So on immigration, President Trump, this is kind of his big issue in 2016, build the wall and deportation were two massive issues for him. So border security, he supports building the border wall. It's been funded through redirecting money from the military and the Pentagon to building the wall along the southern border. On deportation, he is tougher than Biden. And he supports deportation of illegal immigrants, stating that coming here illegally is a crime and thus is a deportable offense. In contrast, many Democrats believe that in order to be deported, you need to commit like a major crime, like a violent crime. And then as for illegal detainment, this one's kind of a hot topic issue right now regarding separating children at the border. His 2018 zero tolerance policy led to the separation of kids from their parents, but because of public pressure, he reversed that. But ICE continues to separate kids from other adult relatives. So if a child were to cross the border illegally with their aunt and uncle, they would probably be separated in contrast if they were to cross with their parents. Let's take a look at Biden. So former Vice President Biden on border security does not support the construction of the border wall, as do, that's pretty party line. He does support, ICE continuing to patrol the border and do their job. For deportation, he said he does not support no deportation in the first 100 days. And interestingly enough, early in the campaign trail, he was hesitant to support Obama era deportations, but he has since said that they were a mistake. But he does support the Obama era DACA program, which basically a DACA recipient is someone that came across the border illegally as a child with their parents and has never really grown up in another country. DACA gives them a pathway to citizenship without being deported. So illegal immigrant detainment, he calls separation, family separation, an intimidation tactic and believes that it should be ended. It is important to note that family separation began under the Obama administration, and this is one of the things he believes was a mistake as well. Let's look at some healthcare. So healthcare is a lot more similar with the two candidates than you'd think. I found that really interesting, but it is interesting. Let's look at some pre-existing, like what his stance on pre-existing conditions. Now, many free market conservatives and free market libertarians, like Republicans, like basically anything right of center, are in favor of allowing insurance companies to deny you based on pre-existing health conditions. However, he supports protecting people with pre-existing conditions and their access to healthcare. So I have asthma and I could potentially get denied, but President Trump wants that to not be an issue. With the Affordable Care Act, he supports repealing and replacing the ACA. Republicans have been saying that for a while, but there's not been, a replacement proposed yet. They've been primarily focusing on the repealing. And prescription drug cost, he thinks they're too high. He just recently signed an executive order sending $200 to people who need help with prescription drug cost. Ignore the typo. And he says costs are too high and recently signed an executive order aimed at lowering costs. Now let's take a look at former Vice President Biden. With pre-existing conditions, much like President Trump, he supports protecting people. However, he wants to do this through the ACA. There's a clause in there that there is no, they can't turn you away for pre-existing conditions, and he wants to keep that. With the ACA, he supports expanding it, which sets him apart from other Democrats, and this is what kind of makes him more of a moderate instead of a progressive, is that he doesn't support a single-payer healthcare system. He actually said he would veto it if Congress passed it and he was in office. He likes the ACA, he supports the ACA, he wants that, and he doesn't want anything more or anything less, really. For prescription drug costs, much like President Trump, he says it's too high. However, he supports using Medicaid to negotiate, saying that that's a better way to negotiate rather than an executive order or something of that sorts. So education, this one's kind of big to us as teachers. So let's take a look at it. So student loan forgiveness, President Trump, he has supported like this COVID loan relief where you're not forgiven, but it's deferring payments until the end of the year to help those that are in financial hardship because of COVID. He does not support student loan forgiveness and thinks it should be paid back by income. So the federal government would not pay it back for you. You have to pay back the loans you took out. So for teacher salary, he has no real stance on that. I was kind of surprised because it's kind of like an important issue with both parties. But he doesn't have one per his campaign website or anything I could really find. So let's take a look at his stance on free and or reduced college. He does not support free or reduced college. His campaign website has no pledges for higher education. This is pretty much a reiteration of his stance in 2016 and pretty much every single Republican stance regarding it. You should be, basically they believe that you should be willing to go in debt to get the education that you need. They view it as more of an investment in that way, while Democrats tend to view it more of a necessity. Former Vice President Biden, on student loan forgiveness, he supports loan forgiveness for debt from public colleges for those earning under $125,000 a year. So it's a lot more limited than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, but he does support some form of student loan forgiveness. For his teacher salary, he supports increasing funding for Title I schools, using funds for those higher salaries and allowing districts to decide which schools need more funding for teacher salaries. Kind of a more free market approach, somewhat like a blended economy approach. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. And for his stance on free or reduced college, much like President Obama, he supports free public 2-year colleges. Doesn't support 4-year, just 2-year, but he does support increasing funding for grants for 4-year colleges, just to make them more affordable but not free. So on economic issues, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at pay equality. So I included this first bullet because I thought this was really interesting. It was something that came out of the RNC, and is just something I found kind of interesting. So in the Trump White House, women make 69 cents for every $1 a male makes in the same position. I found that a little bit interesting. I wanted to share that. And so, but his stance on pay equality is that he does not support the Obama era requirements requiring employees to report pay by race, gender, and job title to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, just to check and see if there was any discrimination in there. He does take a more free market approach, which is pretty common among Republicans. For the labor unions, he does not support workers unionizing. Once again, a more free market approach, standard Republican approach. For Vice President Biden, for pay equality, much like Democrats, he supports laws requiring equal pay for women. And he supports making wage gaps transparent. So he supports that Obama era requirement. For labor unions, he does support workers' rights to unionize. Pretty standard run-of-the-mill Democratic positions there, much like President Trump's economic on these two issues tend to be more run-of-the-mill. I didn't delve into taxes or anything on this because taxes are incredibly difficult. In short, President Trump supports more tax cuts, and former Vice President Biden supports more tax increases for people making over $400,000 a year. I felt like I really shouldn't include this as bullet points because it's a lot more than that. I could do an entire presentation on their tax policies. I encourage you to look into those though. So finally, let's look at some COVID. So for President Trump, on masks, he does not support a federal mask mandate. He believes it should be left up to the states. Once again, a more small government approach to this, much like most conservatives and most Republicans. For schools, he did advocate for schools to reopen this fall, threatening to withhold funding from the schools that did not fully reopen in person. That being said, he does support, safety measures. He just wanted them fully in person. For former Vice President Biden, for masks, he does support a federal mask mandate. Once again, this is a typical, more democratic response to a more big government solution rather than the small government leaving it up to the states. For schools, he does advocate for schools to reopen flexibly. He urged districts to make their own decision based on local case counts with guidelines. He didn't want a one size fits all. And so in conclusion, this is something I like to bring up whenever I talk about voting. The church has said that all major political parties in the US have aspects that reflect the gospel, that one is not better than the other. You can be a good member of the church, a temple recommend carrying member of the church, and be a Republican. Mitt Romney. You can be a Democrat, good member of the church, temple recommend holding member of the church. Harry Reid. Neither one party is better than the other in regards to the church's position on it. But so that being said, if you feel unsatisfied with either candidate, check out some third candidates. There's some third parties, because a lot of people say that voting third party is a throwaway vote, but I don't believe it is. It is a vote for who you think best aligns with your values, and that's incredibly important. That being said, third party candidates rarely win electoral votes. However, if they meet the 5% of the total popular vote, they do get to be on the debate stage in the next go round in the presidential election. So it is not a throwaway vote. You're helping the third party grow. And so I had a friend say this to me once, that voting is a lot like taking a bus. The bus or the candidate may not take you to your end, your ideal, like what you want, where you want the country to be, but you get on the one that takes you in the right direction. So that being said, there's never going to be a candidate that you agree with 100% of the time, and that you think they're the bee's knees, they're going to fix all the problems. Seldom is that the case. However, so that being said, you can't just sit out an election. You need to support the candidate that moves the country in the direction you'd like to see the country being moved in. That being said, if you think the Democrat's the way to go with the Democrat. If you think the Republican's the way to go with the Republican. If you think that's the Green Party, Libertarian Party, Constitution Party, any other party, do it. I've voted Republican, Democrat, third party based on who I think is best going to